everyone, it's Rhonda Weisberg, once again for Channel 63, Up Close and Personal. And today I have the pleasure of being in the home of Irv and Colleen Seldin. And I'll give you a little bit of background about my neighbors, my Laguna neighbors. I met Irv a couple of years ago and Colleen when they first moved to BallenIsles. And soon thereafter, I actually needed him on a professional level. Irv has a long, strong background in several different forms of elder care. Am I correct?
That's right.
That's correct, okay. And the more I thought about it, the more I decided it was important to bring his perspective to our community because we're all of a certain age here and either learning about struggling with different forms of what do we do to help either an aging parent or a spouse. And he's just a wealth of information on that. So I'm going to introduce Irv Seldin to you. Hi, Irv.
Hello. Hello.
Thank you so much for spending time with us. And I'd like you to give us a little bit of the background. Why is it that you ended up in the field of elder care today?
I really have to go back to the beginning, and
Sure.
I'll try to condense 60-some years into about a minute.
Okay.
In 1947, my parents opened up a nursing home with a loan from the GI Bill. They purchased a large mansion in the suburbs of Philadelphia and converted it into what at that time was called a convalescent home. Mm-hmm. I was literally born there. I lived there for the first 10 years of my life, and essentially I had 100 grandparents.
Lucky.
I worked there during the summers, carrying oxygen tanks and pulling laundry carts and things like that. And by the time I was ready to go off to college, the last thing that I wanted to see was another older person. I went off into different fields. At first I thought into academia, but I ended up practicing law for about 6 years. Mm-hmm. I was unexpectedly drawn back to elder care when my dad asked me to look at a proposal for creating a facility for older people that was unlike a nursing home. And as I began to look at the proposal, I thought there was a tremendous entrepreneurial opportunity as well as a tremendous social opportunity to introduce a new model of care for the elderly. At that time, this was back in the early 1980s, the predominant model of aging was that aging is a disease. And regulators and operators looked to the best model they had at the time for treating disease, which was a hospital. And a hospital was a world of stainless steel and vinyl and uniforms and equipment, and it was a very alien,
cold
uninviting
environment. Right.
I had recently been vacationing at a lovely inn on the Chesapeake that was furnished with beautiful period furniture and chandeliers, and I thought to myself, why can't a community for older people look like this rather than like a hospital?
And most of them do today. I've had far too much experience in reviewing a lot of the local nursing homes, and you're right, they do look more like mini country clubs today than
That's right.
what you originally described.
That's right, and it's really taken us 20 to 30 years to reach that point.
Get to that point, right. Okay. So here's a question I think most of us would ask. I have a feeling that something is going on with either one of my parents. I have a feeling that maybe something isn't quite right with a spouse. What do I do? What's your advice?
Well, there are two different questions. The situation with your spouse is very different. You're with them all the time. You're living with them. You're very much aware of what's going on with them. If it's a subtle change in cognition, you're noticing repetition of questions, You're noticing that the person doesn't seem to be performing at the level they were before. I think urging them to see a neurologist would be the first thing that I would suggest. If it's a parent, say living in another town, it's much more difficult. If it's two parents, it's even more difficult.
Oh, yeah. I've had that too.
And the reason it's more difficult with two parents is what will tend to happen is one parent will mask for the other. They'll cover. So that if you call and say, Mom, how's Dad? She'll say, Dad's fine. And he'll say, well, let me speak to Dad. And Dad will get on the phone. And if Dad doesn't stay on the phone as long as he used to, or Mom says, gets back on the phone really quickly, you see this as a change. I think that's usually the first sign that there might be a problem.
Something wrong. Once we get to that point where we decide we need some extra help, how do you differentiate between should I be bringing my parent or spouse to a nursing home, or is it time for me to at least start this way, bringing somebody into the home?
Each family is unique, different answers for different families and different conditions. Basically, about 88% of older people prefer to remain in their home forever. So that if that's something that can be done, I would say that should be the first option. The exception to that would be if the person is depressed, if the person is isolated, and socialization is an important component, then I think either congregate living or assisted living is a better choice, because the person will be forced into a community where they're going to be among peers, they're going to see that other people are in similar situations, and they'll be in situations where it's easier for them to interact and begin to regain their life again.
What is the difference between independent living, assisted, and so on, a nursing home level?
In my experience, the difference between independent living and assisted living is illusory. I don't think there really is such a thing as independent living. I think it's a marketing approach. I think most of the people in independent living are there because they have a need. There's something that they need help with, so they're not really completely independent. You'll find that, in fact, there was a recent study that showed the differences in the populations in independent versus assisted living. And the major difference is that in assisted living, there's a higher percentage of people with cognitive impairment, dementia, whether it's the beginnings of Alzheimer's disease or a vascular dementia or something like that. Deciding which level to go into, it's a decision that has to be made based on not only what the person's condition is at a particular moment in time, but anticipating what will the person's condition be and what will Mom be like in 6 months or a year or 2 years. So it's often a difficult decision.
Right. So my understanding is that if you were going to choose a form of care outside of your home, and it was going to start with either assisted, independent, or assisted, it's best to find one that has all three levels of care so that there isn't an additional move if need be. Would you agree with that?
I think that that's generally a good idea. You did mention a moment ago nursing homes, and I think that's a very, very different kind of a choice. A nursing home today is more of it's a skilled facility where people need to be because they need hands-on medical care. In that sense, it's a completely different animal than assisted living or independent or congregate living.
Right, but it can be a natural progression if
It
a
can
parent
be.
lives long enough that it goes to that level.
Right.
And so I think keeping them within somewhat the same environment is of help to everyone involved.
That's right.
Okay. When a parent does need home care, if the funds are not available, any words of advice?
Well, there are two approaches. One is if you are fortunate enough to have long-term care insurance, that will typically cover virtually all the costs of home care, depending on the policy.
Right.
So if your parents have purchased a policy, it can usually be used for either home care or assisted living or nursing home.
Mm-hmm.
For people who have significant assets, there really is no third-party payment for home care, unless it's medical care. There's a distinction that people don't always pay attention to, and that is there's Medicare-based skilled home care, which is an episodic visit. It's somebody comes, a nurse comes to the home and performs a specific medical procedure, whether it's an injection or it's physical therapy or it's something with a feeding tube. That's a specific medical procedure, and it's paid for by Medicare.
I see. If you have a parent or a spouse and you know that it's time to do something, but you're getting a lot of resistance on their part, what do you recommend to them?
It's a very, very common problem. And the reason that it's a common problem is giving up your independence is a very difficult thing. An older person senses that they're losing control. It's a threat to their sense of self-esteem. They're used to being able to do things by themselves. They're used to making their own decisions. Admitting that you need help is very difficult.
For all of us.
For all
at
of
any
us,
level,
that's right.
Right.
That's right. The approach that I recommend is to always bear in mind that your parent or your spouse's self-esteem is really important, and don't undermine it.
Right.
That means talking to them choosing your language very carefully about help, couching it in ways that are not threatening. I think above all, not presenting it as a permanent change. In other words, you don't say, well, Mom, now you have to have home care for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. There's always going to be a stranger at your house. A much better approach is, Mom, let's try this for a few days. Right. You know, I have a friend and she has somebody who can really help you. It'll make things easier for you. Right. Let's try it out for a few days or a week. Mm-hmm.
That's very good advice. Okay. Very good advice. Where would I or someone in this position find a much-needed support group?
Okay. This happens to, we're very lucky. This is an area where there's a wealth of resources. Many of them are religiously based. For example, the Albert Jewish Family and Children's Service in West Palm has a number of support groups that meet all over the communities here. Catholic Charities has a number of support groups, and most of the major churches have support groups. There's also a wonderful local nonprofit called Alzheimer's Community Care, which is located in West Palm Beach. And they run support groups at about 3 or 4 different locations.
Irv, this is a topic that we could speak about for, well, ad infinitum, as you well know. And sadly, we had 15 minutes and they went by like that because you're a wealth of information. And I really appreciate the time that you've taken. And can I be so bold as to say that you would welcome anybody in the community to give you a call if they had questions? You're in the book. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you.